Aloha and welcome to today's National ANA webinar on Native Language Community Coordination Demonstration Projects. This is an ANA pre-application training webinar. Today is April 21st, 2016, and it is 4 p.m. Eastern Time. This session is going to be an hour and a half long to accommodate the extra training and to give you more time to ask whatever questions you may have to the trainer, and ANA staff will be on the line. Today's session is being presented by the Pacific Region Training and Technical Assistance Center. We are the TTA Center for the Pacific. ANA also operates TTA centers to offer free training and technical assistance to the Western, Eastern, and Alaska regions. And you can learn more about our region and our TTA Center at our website there, www.anapacificbasin.org. My name is Matthew Ng. I'll be today's trainer. You can see me there on the picture on the far right. I'm also the Outreach and Technology Specialist for the Pacific region. So a little bit about the Administration for Native Americans. ANA promotes social and economic self-sufficiency for Native Americans in two ways. First, by providing discretionary grant funding for community-based projects and training and technical assistance to eligible tribes and Native organizations. And second, through advocacy and policy development on behalf of Native Americans. And ANA's vision is for all Native communities to be thriving. And so they will continue to work towards those ends in all that they do. And you'll see that this NLCC grant is an extension of that vision. ANA has several funding initiatives in addition to the NLCC grant. For most of the grants ANA offers, the deadline has already passed. The initiatives you see on screen were all due on April 6th. ANA offers the Social and Economic Development Strategies grant called SEDS. They also offer one specifically for Alaska villages called SEDS Alaska, and one focused on sustainable employment and economic development strategies called SEEDS. ANA also offers the ERE, Environmental Regulatory Enhancement Grant, and there are two other native language grants that they offer, the Preservation and Maintenance and Esther Martinez Immersion Initiative. And you'll see how the new NLCC grant is an extension of the pre-existing native language initiatives. So ANA's two newest initiatives, which are now open and taking applications, are the NLCC initiative, Native Language Community Coordination Demonstration Project, which will be due on June 1st. And we'll be talking about that today, as well as the Native Youth Initiative for Leadership, Empowerment, and Development, also called iLead, and that one is going to be due on June 13th. So the Western region is going to be hosting a webinar offering more information on the new iLead funding opportunity. This will be held on May 12th at 1 p.m. Pacific time. And so you can find out more about that session on their website, anawestern.org. So without further ado, let's get into today's session. So our objectives for today, number one, is to learn how to apply for an NLCC grant on Grants.gov, which is how you'll have to find and upload your application. We want to understand the ANA funding opportunity announcement called the FOA and the evaluation criteria that will be guiding the scoring of your applications. And we'll also want to learn how to format, package, structure, and submit an NLCC grant application for ANA funding consideration. We're going to start with a short message from Commissioner Lillian Sparks Robinson. Then we're going to get into the FOA. We're going to look at all of the categories of scoring criteria found in the evaluation criteria. And then we're going to learn how to prepare and submit the application package, go over some useful resources, talk about some other recorded webinars you may want to watch, and then open it up to Q&A, at which time we'll be able to answer whatever questions you may have about NLCC grant guidelines or how to apply. So we are very honored today to be able to feature ANA's Commissioner Lillian Sparks Robinson. Lillian Sparks Robinson, a Lakota woman of the Rosebud and Oglala Sioux tribes, is the Commissioner of the Administration for Native Americans. Ms. Sparks was confirmed by the United States Senate as the Commissioner on March 3rd, 2010, and was sworn in on March 5th. She has devoted her career to supporting the educational pursuits of Native American students, protecting the rights of Indigenous people, and empowering tribal communities. Named one of 7 young Native American leaders by USA Today magazine, Ms. Sparks received her BA in Political Science from Morgan State University, located in her hometown of Baltimore, Maryland, and her JD from Georgetown University Law Center in DC. Ms. Sparks is admitted to practice in Maryland. We are honored to have Commissioner Sparks Robinson with us here today to give us a little background on the new NLCC initiative.
Great. Thank you so much, Matthew, for that introduction, and thank you to all of you for dialing in and taking the time to learn more about the FELA and the Native Language Community Coordination Grant. So this grant is a long time, or program, I should say, is a long time in the making. The reason why we're offering this demonstration program is because I have visited several of our Native communities, both in, or all over, I should say, Indian country, but also in the Pacific and, of course, in Alaska, and have noticed that a lot of times the community is doing a very strong effort in language, but there might be several efforts that aren't always coordinated or able to collaborate, not for lack of trying or for wanting, but really just for lack of time and resources, not being able to spend the time necessary to get all the right people into the same room and talk about how a community might be able to support an education for a young person starting in their early education programs, continuing through K through 12, and then through a higher education setting that is all based in the native language. And while many of our communities have several components, they might have a Head Start or child care program that has native language components, and they might have a K through 8 immersion school, and then they might have some electives offered within the tribal college and university or whatever higher education institution they're partnering with, but they might have pieces missing. And we know that a lot of our communities are pressed for time when it comes to revitalizing our languages and may not always have, again, the time and resources necessary to sit down and develop a strategy to really allow for a community to come together and do a full continuum of education, again, that is based in the native language. And so this demonstration program is really an opportunity for a community that has several of the components that will be further discussed and are listed in the FELA, to spend the time necessary and receive the funding to develop strategies and plans that will provide for hopefully a sustainable plan on providing an education in the native language. And that doesn't mean that the student will graduate with a degree in the native language. They could graduate with a degree in math or computer science, but their entire education and instruction will be provided within their native language. So we're really excited about this, and we're hoping to learn a lot as well. And so thank you for dialing in, and we are looking forward to what questions you might have after the full presentation. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Commissioner, for articulating that very inspirational vision. I think that idea of connecting that educational continuum can really resonate with a lot of the people who are on today's session. So before we start, I'd like to ask one question just so we can better tailor our delivery today. The question is, have you ever attended an ANA pre-application training or applied for an ANA grant in the past? And so if you look up at the top right of your screen, you'll see a poll. please take a second to provide your answer. All right, so it looks like we have about 70-something% of the room who has applied for an ANA grant or has attended training in the past. And so, for the 10 of you who have not, I will try to fill in those gaps as much as possible. Please keep in mind that many of our pre-application training concepts are normally taught in a 2-day training, but where you can really find the source of all of this information is in the funding opportunity announcements. So, while we will be covering the details of the grant initiative in today's session, you'll really want to download and read from top to bottom the funding opportunity announcement when you have time. And we'll be showing you how to find and read through those in a second. And regarding questions, we will be taking questions during the Q&A section of today's session. If you have any issues with using the system, you can enter it into the chat box on the bottom right corner of the screen, and we'll attempt to help you with that. Otherwise, any questions related to content will be answered towards the end of the webinar. So you can type them into the chat box and they'll be read and answered at that time. Okay, so like I said, if you want to get to know the Native Language Community Coordination Demonstration Project details, you'll want to download and read through the funding opportunity announcement. So first we're going to cover what's in the FOA and how to find it. The first thing to point out is that this initiative has a unique CFDA number. And so a CFDA number is what identifies an individual funding initiative. You'll notice that its number 93.340 is new, and it does not overlap with PNM or the ME previous native language initiatives. This is important because you are only allowed to hold one grant award under each CFDA number. And so because it does not share a CFDA number with any of the previous native language initiatives, you can potentially hold one of each at the same time. Okay, so like I said, the first step is going to be to download the funding opportunity announcement. The best place to find this is on the ANA website at acf.hhs.gov/programs/ANA. You'll want to go to the Grants tab, like you see there on screen, and then in the drop-down menu, find Funding Opportunities. It's going to take you to this page that you see here on screen. ANA has conveniently pinned the NLCC FOA to the homepage of the Funding Opportunities section. You can just click on that area that's highlighted in red there, and then download your funding opportunity announcement to your computer. It'll be a 60-something page PDF. So once you get your FOA, the first page should look something like this. You'll want to verify that you are looking at the correct one, and you can see there that it says, it has the NLCC name, has the due date as being this year, so you can verify that you're looking at the correct FOA. The next page is going to be, it's going to show you your table of contents, and so you can see here there are 8 sections within the FOA. We're about to go through each of those sections, but again, you'll definitely want to read your FOA from top to bottom in order to make sure that you have everything you need in your grant application. This would be the next page of the FOA, kind of spelling out the overview. And also within the FOA, you'll find the evaluation criteria, like what you see on screen now. this is exactly what panel reviewers are going to use when they're scoring your application. So we'll go over that in the second part of today's session. And so let's start getting into what you can expect to find in the FOA. And so this is just a basic overview of each section. Again, this is not a replacement for actually going into it and reading your FOA from top to bottom. Section 1 describes the program. NLCC funds projects to support communities that can demonstrate success in offering a continuum of native language instruction from early childhood all the way through post-secondary education, like the commissioner just articulated. This is building upon the short-term project-based outcomes of ANA's pre-existing native language initiatives, the Preservation and Maintenance Initiative and Esther Martinez Immersion Initiative. And what this is trying to do is actually address those gaps in the full native language continuum within a community. You know, like I said, from pre-K all the way to post-college. That's why this initiative is being executed as a demonstration project, right? You're trying to demonstrate a community's potential to integrate all the various levels of native language education by using a model that incorporates every site-based educational partner within that continuum. And so, in order to help you to demonstrate that capacity and to also build the capacity for your community to be able to do that, ANA is operating this through the cooperative agreement structure, which means that you'll be working closely with ANA staff to support your ongoing operations. And we'll get a little bit more into what that means later. Regarding your required educational programs and partners, the NLCC grant is unique in that in it you must include site-based education partners for coordinating at all education levels. So this means, preschool, elementary, middle school, high school, and post-secondary. It's not mandatory to have full native language instruction at all of those levels at the start of the project, but because the goal is to create that seamless continuum of native language education, you must be able to demonstrate the potential to collaborate effectively so that you can close that gap by the end of the project. And to demonstrate these partnerships in your application, you will be required to provide third-party agreements from each site-based educational program in your continuum. That means you'll need to include letters of commitment that explicitly spell out, how each partner is going to contribute actively to this project and how you'll work together to make decisions and to carry out those decisions as one community-based continuum team. Regarding these cooperative agreements, the cooperative agreements mean that there will be more federal involvement than a normal ANA grant award in order to increase your long-term chances of success. So how this will be manifested will be through a kickoff meeting with the ANA NLCC project team. This may mean ongoing evaluation and data collection, as well as capacity building help along the way. You may be jointly establishing outcomes for your demonstration project with the NLCC team. There may be an annual convening of your NLCC grantee cohort so that you can share best practices with each other. And ANA may also develop reports based on your demonstration project to share data and outcomes with other communities. And so Section 1 also lists some project activities that you may want to consider in your project design. This might be community-defined project evaluation metrics, developing a sustainable partnership across all of your educational sites, developing tribal and state policies to support language coordination, maybe working with federal, state, and local agencies to use alternative assessments or create culture and language-based exceptions to standardized assessments, maybe modifying teacher licensures and certifications to meet institutional requirements, aligning the curricula for native language education, and other topics in the native language across that educational curriculum, professional development for teachers and support staff, and more. You certainly are not limited to these, but by understanding the objectives and focuses of the NLCC program, you can design a project that works for your community. Section 2 is all about the federal award information. So this program has an estimated total funding for the first funding period of $1.5 million. The expected number of awards to be made is 4. And so that's an average projected award amount of $300,000 for the first funding period. The projected start date for NLCC projects will be August 1st, 2016. And the length of the project is going to be 60 months with 5 12-month budget periods. That means that NLCC projects should last a full 5 years. So you will be designing a 5-year project. Section 3 outlines the eligibility information. Eligible applicants, like all ANA funding initiatives, are Indian tribes and consortia, urban Indian centers, Alaska Native villages and village-serving nonprofits, public and nonprofit agencies serving Pacific Islanders, and tribal colleges and universities. And for a full list of eligible applicants, you should look at Section 3. Especially for the nonprofits, you should include board certification or resolution recognizing the submission of an ANA application on behalf of the organization. And you may also need to prove that a majority of the board members on your nonprofit are representative of the community to be served. And so that could be by demonstrating that more than half of them are qualified as being eligible Native individuals themselves, or you could have members of the community to be served actually write letters to vouch for the involvement and standing relationship of that board member to the community. So all of your grant applications will be required to offer a 20% match to cover 20% of what you estimate to be the total project cost. And this can be in the form of cash or in-kind assets and services. So that non-federal share should be provided by your organization or partners. You can request a match waiver if your organization lacks the available resources to meet that non-federal share. In this case, you should back that up by some type of institutional audit if possible. Or if you can provide evidence, if you can provide evidence of a reasonable effort to obtain cash or this in-kind contribution. And this will be included in a letter with your application. However, you may not assume approval of this request. So you'll still have to plan your project accordingly. ANA does not fund third-party TTA to other organizations or tribes, especially that is duplicative of what we do here in the regional TTA centers. It does not fund projects designed strictly for core administration. It will not reimburse you for pre-award costs. It will not fund ongoing social service delivery, especially those duplicative of existing social service programs, DHHS programs. It will not fund construction projects, including major renovations, especially if you're going to be putting down an actual foundation and building a new structure. In certain cases, minor renovations may be allowable if you can justify it as necessary for your project. And again, see the full offer details on that. ANA will not fund projects from consortia of tribes that don't include the specific roles for each consortium member tribe. Each member tribe of the consortium needs to be involved. And ANA will not fund the purchase of real estate. All right, so section 4 is where you're going to see all of the information about the application and submission. So this grant is going to be, grant applications are going to be due on June 1st, 2016 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. It's important to see that that's 11:59 p.m. Eastern, because you'll want to translate that into your local local time zone to figure out when it's going to be due in your neck of the woods. Anything submitted after that time will not be considered. In the 4, you'll also see that a letter of intent was due on April 15th. Even though this deadline has passed, ANA is still accepting letters. It's basically just going to be used to determine how many reviewers they're going to need for the panel review process. If you haven't sent that in yet, please do. You can email it to carmelia.strickland@acf.hhs.gov, and you'll find that in your FOA. Basically, it's just going to be saying that your organization is planning to apply for an NLCC grant on your letterhead, and you'll find more details again in section 4 of the FOA. So your application must be submitted electronically. You can download your application form from Grants.gov, and you'll also be uploading it via Grants.gov. But you'll be working on it and filling it out offline on your personal computer. Your organization, in order to apply, must be registered in DUNS, SAM, and Grants.gov. You'll want to start with the DUNS to get your DUNS number if you don't already have one, and then go to SAM and then Grants.gov. SAM being the System for Awards Management. These things will work in order, and if you start now, you'll definitely be done in time, but if you wait too long and try to register right before the last day, you might not be able to get registered in time, so please start as soon as possible. As you're registering, you'll see these two terms here. The AOR is going to be the Authorized Organizational Representative, who is authorized to sign and speak on behalf of your entire organization, whereas the point of contact, or POC, is going to be the main contact for matters related to this particular application submission. But keep in mind that the AOR is going to have to be the one whose username and password is used to eventually submit your application once you're ready. And so if you need more help with this, please call your TTA center or see your pre-application manual, which I'll tell you how to find later. And there is a way that you can request an exemption from this electronic submission mandate, but you'll need to request that in writing by May 18th. And the only way that you can be granted this exemption waiver is if you can prove that you lack internet access, or you have limited computer capacity to handle either the file upload or the bandwidth necessary for that upload. Section 4 also spells out the formatting for your application. So you should be using 1-inch margins, double-spaced, and Times New Roman 12-point font. You'll want to follow the applicant checklist to make sure you have everything that you need to include. And you're going to have a total page count of 150 pages. That is going to be your maximum. And this includes everything except for a business plan if you need one. It will not include your OWP or any of your required forms, assurances, and certifications, most of which will be embedded in your application package. Section 5 goes over the application review procedures and information. You want to look a lot at the evaluation criteria, which spells out exactly how reviewers will score your application out of a total of 100 points. And we'll be going over that shortly. Section 5 also outlines the ANA application review process. So what happens after you submit your application to ANA is that it'll be screened initially for basic disqualification factors. Cross your T's and dot your I's. They'll make sure that you're eligible to apply and whatnot. And then it'll go into the objective panel review stage. At this point, your application is going to be reviewed by groups of 4 to 6 reviewers who will each independently read your application, write comments, and score it on their own, and then convene to discuss those scores to come up with something that accurately conveys their group consensus. And they'll be scoring against the objective evaluation criteria that is found in your FOA. And then the highest scoring applications from that panel review stage will go to ANA's internal review, at which point the commissioner will make the final decisions on which projects will receive funding. And you can see page 47 of the NLCC FOA for a full list of the commissioner's considerations. There are 3 more sections in the FOA. Section 6 goes over the award administration information. Section 7 gives you some agency contacts, and one of those agency contacts, Ms. Carmelia Strickland, we have here on the call today, and she'll be available during the Q&A section to answer some questions that you may have. And then Section 8 includes some other information. That's also where you'll find the checklist that you can use to make sure you have everything in your grant application. So the next part of today's session, we're going to go over the evaluation criteria. And like I said, this is what panel reviewers are going to use to score your application. So understanding this will help. There are 5 scoring criteria, and these 5 criteria represent the conceptual logic that ANA expects in your project design. So it starts with the need for assistance section, right? This is where you're articulating the problem that your community is facing. In this case, problems related to those gaps in the educational continuum. Then you're going to have the outcomes expected, what we can expect to see as outcomes of your project and how those will solve the problem. Then we're going to look at the approach. Right? This is going to talk about the activities that will be executed in order for you to achieve the objectives that you defined in the previous section, and it's also where you'll talk about the methodology that you're using. Then we have the objective work plan. This is a line item listing of all of the activities that will take place during your project, as well as who will do them and by which date they'll be accomplished. And lastly, you'll spell out the budget in a line item format, and then include a budget justification to explain how all of those costs are justified in relation to project activities. So the first section is going to be the need for assistance section, which is worth a total of 10 points. In this section, you'll be scored on these 4 criteria. The first is a clear and concise problem statement that identifies a specific problem requiring a solution to be addressed by the project objectives. Next is a supporting information or data detailing the scope and nature of the problem. You also have current challenges in addressing the problem, barriers that you will need to address. And then description of the community to be served and intended beneficiaries of the project. In this case, your community will be very much related to this continuum of native language education that you'll be serving through this project. So ANA is looking for this concise problem statement. And this is going to be, 1 or 2 sentences, really concisely summing up the problem that your community is facing. And this is going to serve as the baseline for the rest of the project planning logic that will continue. So your problem statement, will be, will turn into your goal will be the opposite of your goal, and that goal will inform your objectives and so on. Your need for assistance section should define in measurable terms the problem. It should describe how the community identified the problem, and it should describe how the problem stands between the community and the achievement of your community's long-range goals, especially those that have to do with native language education. Your long-range goal describes an ideal state for the community or organization, whereas your project goal represents the new condition that will be in place as a result of the project's successful completion. And so this project goal should be, the direct inverse of your problem statement, right? It should demonstrate a reduction of the condition or in the problem, or maybe a resolution of the problem that was faced, or at least an increased capacity to resolve the condition that you set forth. So, what's really important in this project design logic is showing how that long-range community goal, that problem statement, and that project goal are interrelated. The next section is going to be the outcomes expected section, worth a total of 25 points. There are 3 criteria within this section. First, the current status of the language. Then your objectives, which should be measured by the SMART criteria. And then, which community-specific outcomes you've established for the project. So for the status of language assessment, you're going to want to include detail about the current status of your native language within your community. This might include the number of fluent participants, number of trained teachers, language learning resources, the use of the language within the community, a description of language classes and other resources that are currently available to you, and that would be at each level of this continuum. And so, in order to take in accurate assessment of these resources and available assets, you may want to use an asset mapping process. We have offered a webinar on that in the past, and that will be one of the resources that I'll recommend to you at the end of this session. And we'll be sending out links to those past webinars as well. You'll need to include a full description of the end of project goals for the language, and you'll want to use the same metrics as the current status measures. And what you're trying to do here is demonstrate a logical connection between the current status and the end of project status of the language, establishing a starting point and an end point, a baseline and an end of project status, so that we can see a measurable improvement in, the status of native language education in your community's educational continuum. So objectives for your project are going to be evaluated based on the SMART criteria. And SMART is an acronym that we use. The S stands for specific, in that it should identify the outcomes that will be achieved in very specific terms. It should be measurable, using quantifiable or objective terms to describe how progress and completion will be measured, right, in actual measurable, quantifiable numbers. It should be achievable, especially given the proposed time frame, approach, resources, capacity, staff, and whatnot. It should be relevant to the problem statement, the project goal, and the long-term goals of the community to be served. And it should be time-bound, with an end date reflecting completion within the project period. And so this doesn't need to be for the full 5 years, but make sure that it's always going to be 60 months or less because of the 5-year period for NLCC. An example of this, so let's imagine that, instead of the administration for Native Americans, it was the administration for Kitten Americans, right? You might say, by the end of the 48th month, 45 kittens will successfully graduate from the Healthy Kitten program, gaining essential cuteness skills as measured by the KCI, Kitten Cuteness Index. Right? You have, by the end of the 48th month, you have that time bound. 45 kittens will successfully graduate from the program, gaining skills as measured by some predefined index that you can use to justify the quantifiable measures. So think about SMART criteria as you create your objectives. Next, you're going to be evaluated on community-specific outcomes. These are identified outcomes that describe supports and services that create the opportunity for seamless language learning from preschool through post-secondary education. The end of project goals should address gaps in coordination and language learning as described in the current status of the native language and the need for assistance. So, you want to make your outcomes very specific to your community, and you want to provide evidence that these outcomes were designed specifically for your community. The next section is going to be your approach section, and this is going to be worth a total of 35 points, the biggest scoring chunk of the bunch. It's going to be in 4 parts: planning and implementation, educational partnership collaboration and community strategy, communication strategy, community involvement, and the organizational capacity and staffing plan. So as far as planning and implementation goes, there are 5 criteria. The first is it clearly describes resources, both tangible and intangible, that are available to implement the project. Again, part of that asset mapping idea. It provides sufficient details explaining how specific tasks and activities will be completed and who is responsible for completing each task. For example, methods for addressing coordination gaps in native language instruction, details describing teacher trainings or research development, how fluency and participation will be monitored and assessed, etc. You want to identify contingency plans that describe adequate strategies to address potential obstacles and challenges. So, you're thinking about if this certain likely or maybe even unlikely, thing were to happen in our project that could pose a potential barrier, what would we do if that happens? And then laying out some of those contingency plans with strong strategies to address them. Then you'll want to identify a feasible plan to preserve any curricula, recordings, or materials produced by the project for the benefit of future generations, if applicable. If your project is going to have any type of outputs like this, you will want to keep them. Okay, and then as far as educational partnership, collaboration, and your community strategy communication strategy for having all of your site-based educational partners working as a team throughout the project. There are 6 sub-criteria. Provides details to fully describe one or more existing potential partnerships with a site-based educational institution at each educational level. Once again, this goes from pre-K through elementary, middle, and high school, and all the way to post-secondary education. Provides details that fully describe the type and extent of native language instruction currently or potentially available via each partnership. Right, this is a community coordination demonstration project. So part of this is to demonstrate the potential of your community to be able to close that native language gap. So, you don't need to be doing native language instruction at each level at the start of the project, but you should have the potential to do it by the end. And then it provides strategies to engage community partners and to maintain or develop partnerships as applicable. Provides strategies to address gaps in existing language instruction or resources. Includes a communication strategy to share information and make any necessary decisions with educational partners, as a team, so that you can have everyone working together, which should contribute positively to long-term buy-in and coordination on execution of whatever plans you come up with. And describe how the project will be governed and how decisions will be made that affect multiple entities. The next section has to do with community involvement. This is really important to ANA's project design philosophy, which is very much based in a community-led and centered type of logic. So in your community involvement section, you'll want to describe how community input was used in developing the project. So if you had a series of community meetings, you might have sign-in sheets, or if you did surveys, you might have survey results and summaries. Any evidence of community members participating in that planning process is you should have included in your application. And make sure you remember to qualify each of your community members as being a part of the eligible Native community to be served. You should demonstrate the ability to maintain community support and participation during project implementation, including how participants will be recruited. You want to include specific outreach activities or other methods for building community awareness of the project and how to keep community members informed of progress and outcomes. The next section is about organizational capacity and staffing plan. The application should provide details demonstrating the necessary capacity to implement activities and monitor project progress in order to ensure successful completion of objectives. It should fully describe a project staffing plan that includes staff responsibilities and project personnel with sufficient qualifications to fulfill those responsibilities. So you'll want to include as attachments, resumes, and job descriptions. And this might be like required licensing, professional experience, subject matter expertise, teacher licensing, and whatnot. Details a realistic plan for recruitment and hiring, only applicable if new hires are required. But also keep in mind, and this might be related to your contingency plan, that sometimes people who we have, we planned to be a part of the project as staff, might actually find another job or have some life event happen between the point where we submitted the application and when the project is actually supposed to start. So it's always a good idea to have contingencies for staff as well. And your organizational capacity and staffing plan should clearly describe how oversight and management of federal funds will be properly ensured and identify who will be responsible for maintaining oversight and program reporting, activities, staff, partners, and finances. All right, so the next section of the evaluation criteria is about the objective work plan. And the objective work plan is a line item representation of all the activities that will happen during your project as they relate to the objectives, right? And so these activities relate to the objectives. Objectives contribute to the goal, and the goal is represents the solution to the problem statement. So your objective work plan should align with the information provided in your project narrative, but serve as a standalone document to communicate problem statement, project goal, objectives, activities, results, benefits, and the criteria for evaluating those results and benefits. And so when they say a standalone document, it really means that if you had one staff member, like say a project director, had to leave the project for whatever reason, her replacement should be able to come into the project, pick up the OWP, look at the line item, at the activity stage where the last person left off from, and then continue right there. So a standalone document. The OWP should include key activities needed to implement the project in each project year, indicating start and end dates with sufficient time for completion and detailing how, when, and by whom each activity will be conducted. It should include results and benefits that mark milestone achievements in support of accomplishing objectives, and criteria for evaluating results and benefits that explain how these milestones will be measured. OWP should demonstrate logical connections between the different project elements so that it's clear how implementing activities will lead to achieving the objectives, and how achieving the objectives will accomplish the project goal and address the problem statement. So again, that's that logic that we're looking for. The last section is worth a total of 10 points. This is your budget and budget justification. Keep in mind that when you're looking through your application, you're going to see some standard forms like the SF424. Well, the SF424, although it does ask you for budget information, it is not a replacement for your line item budget. Your line item budget will be its own thing that you can create on your own, and you'll attach to your project plan and grant application along with the budget justification. So your budget should provide a comprehensive line item budget for each project year, accounting for all expenditures separated into federal and non-federal cost share necessary to implement the project. It should include a budget justification for each project year, detailing cost basis and calculations to demonstrate how each line item expenditure was derived, with vendor estimates for larger expenditures where applicable. And it should sufficiently explain all costs to be programmatically justified in relation to the proposed activities and objectives. So, your line item budget should list all of the costs that you need for your project for each year. And then your budget justification should be explaining those. And if you have, if any single unit costs more than $5,000, then you'll also need to provide additional a justification, which may include competitive quotes and whatnot, and you'll see details for that in your FOA once again. And this is really just showing you that it's really important that you read your FOA again, from top to bottom. This is what's going to allow you to become familiar with every requirement expected of applicants applying for NLCC grants. So just to review, the evaluation criteria is based on 5 scoring criteria. Number 1 is that need for assistance, worth a total of 10 points, where you'll spell out the problem that the community is facing. The section 2 is the outcomes expected section, where you're talking about what outcomes you can expect from this project. You're going to be trying to serve the goal, which is the solution to the problem, defining actionable objectives that will contribute towards that goal. And then in your approach section, you'll be discussing the activities that are required to accomplish those objectives and defending the methodology that you're going to be using, both in terms of how feasible and likely the success of that methodology would be, as well as its appropriateness to your community's specific needs. And then the objective work plan is going to be a standalone document that is going to be like the programmatic roadmap to your project, which will also say who does each activity and by when each will be accomplished. And then lastly, your budget and budget justification will show how much this is going to cost. And then your organization will be paying or finding in-kind donations to cover 20% of the total project cost. And your A&A grant award, if you're awarded, would cover the 80% of your total project cost. So remember that every point counts. Only the highest scoring applications will move on to the internal review stage for the commissioner to make her final decision. So, this just means read through your FOA, become very familiar with it, and, write as well as you can. Okay, so the last section is going to be on preparing and submitting the application package. And as soon as we're done with this section, we're going to be opening it up to Q&A. So if you have any questions, you can start to think about them now. Okay, so to get your application package, you're going to want to go to www.grants.gov, and we're going to search by CFDA number 93.340 so that we can download the application package and the accompanying instructions to our personal computer. Once we download that application package, which is a rich multimedia PDF, once you download it to your local computer, then you can work on it offline, and you can save your progress as you work on it. But once you're ready to submit it, you'll need to go back online, and you'll submit it through Grants.gov. And we'll show you how to do that in a second. So what you see on screen is a screenshot of the Grants.gov homepage, and I hope you can see that. On the homepage, you're going to look for the tab that says Search Grants, and I have that highlighted there on screen with a red box around it. Once you click that tab, you should see the search grants screen. You'll see an option for basic search criteria. So look at the CFDA field and type in the CFDA number for NLCC, which is 93.340, and click search. You'll see your search results pop up, which will look like what you see on screen. Click the blue link in the funding opportunity number column in order to see the details on that program. If you click that blue link, this is what you'll see, what's on screen now. So once you're on that screen, you'll want to make sure that you're looking at the right program. In this case, we verified it by, we can see the Native Language Community Coordination Demonstration Project listed here. So you're going to want to click on that tab that says Package, which I have highlighted there in red. Once you click on that tab, you'll see something like this. It's a table that it has the CFDA number listed there. You're looking at the right thing. NLCC. Some of you will notice that it says that the closing date is 5-31, but the actual due date is going to be 6-1, which is June 1st. So this is the only screen where this might show up for you, but that will depend on your local time zone, probably. So just don't be confused by this. The real deadline is going to be June 1st, again at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. But what you really want to click on is this blue link here that says Select Package. That'll take you to the next screen. You want to click on this button that says Download Package to get your application package. You also want to download the instructions document. At the last page of the instructions, you'll find the template for your one of your required forms, which is the MOE, or Maintenance of Effort form, which you'll have to include in your application as well. So once you download your application package, you'll find it on your desktop or whatever local folder that you save it to. You can shut down your internet browser if you want. You'll no longer be online. And then you'll open up this application package in a program. I would recommend using Adobe Reader, which is free. You can download the latest version for free, or you could use Adobe Acrobat Pro if you have access to that. But keep in mind that you might need to open the application package from your desktop. If you try and open it from your browser, or if you see that the PDF is trying to open up as like a new tab in your internet browser, then all of the rich features might not show up, and it might just say like not able to view or something like that. So once you open it on your computer, it'll look like this. You'll see up here that you can verify that you're looking at the correct one. You can click this button as you work on it to save your progress. This will save it to your local computer. Any field that you see highlighted in yellow like this with a red outline means that that's a required field. And so unless you fill out every yellow highlighted, red outline field, the system is not going to allow you to validate your form, and it won't let you submit it. So that's why you see right now this Save and Submit button is gray, because you can't click it yet because there are still mandatory fields like this yellow one that are not filled out. Once you think that you have filled out everything successfully and you've uploaded all of your attachments and whatnot, then you're going to click this button that says Check Package for Errors. It's going to make sure you have everything, and then this Save and Submit button will become black. You'll be able to click it and submit your application. So if you look at this list of forms here, you'll see that you have the SF424 that I talked about a little bit earlier, this lobbying form, 424A, 424B, and your project site locations form. These are all just standard forms that are actually embedded right into your grant application package, and you can fill them out right there in the package. I also want to point out this objective work plan down here is listed as an optional document, but it's actually mandatory. And so the objective work plan is embedded in the application. You're going to have to click that checkbox there. Once you click it, you'll see that the objective work plan will open on the inside of your application package, and you'll be able to fill it out right there in the package. So once again, even though it says optional, it's actually mandatory for ANA. So in this list of forms, there are 3 that are a little different. You'll see the other attachments form, the project narrative attachment form, and the budget narrative attachment form. These are, this is where you're going to be uploading the stuff that you write on your own, right? So that the project application, the elements that I was talking about earlier, they need to be under 150 pages, and you're going to break them up to attach them to each of these attachment forms. It's going to be similar to like how you attach an attachment to an email. You'll attach your file as a single PDF to each of these attachment forms, and I'll show you how to do that. So in your project narrative attachment file, you're going to include your project narrative, which will have your need for assistance, outcomes expected, approach, geographic location, which might be a description of your community, organizational capacity, protection of sensitive and or confidential information, and plan for oversight of federal award funds. All this stuff is going to be included in a single PDF and uploaded to that project narrative attachment file. Okay, and it's going to be like, like I said, similar to uploading an attachment to an email that you're creating. You'll click, attach file. It'll direct you to browse for that file somewhere on your computer. You'll find it, click attach, and now it'll be uploaded into the application package. Same thing for the budget narrative attachment file, except that in this section, you're just going to include the line item budget that you create on your own. Remember that this is not the SF424, it's your own line item budget. And your budget justification, which justifies each cost as being related to necessary activities in your project. And this will be combined into a single PDF and uploaded to the budget narrative attachment file. Then on the other attachments file, you're going to include all the other attachments that you might have. And so, one of the required ones, really important, is the letters of commitment from your continuum partners. You want to have one letter from each partner at each level, pre-K, elementary, middle, high school, and post-secondary. Ideally, these will be on the official letterhead for each site-based partner. It'll be signed by someone authorized to speak on that organization's behalf, and it'll explicitly spell out what each partner is going to be contributing to the project and how they're going to be involved. You also want to include your required governing body documentation and assurance of community representation on the board, if applicable, proof of nonprofit status, if applicable, resumes and related job descriptions for staff, indirect cost agreements if you do have that, supporting documentation and evidence, whatever you think is relevant. Remember that reviewers will not be allowed to Google stuff on your organization or otherwise do their own research or consider things that are not actually included in your application itself. So if you want to refer to any type of appendix or any type of third-party research or anything like that, you can attach it as a summary. You attach it or a summary of it to your other attachments file. And so if possible, you should include all of these things as a single PDF and upload that to the other attachments file. And remember that you have only up to 150 pages, double-spaced, 1-inch margins, Times New Roman, 12-point font, a total maximum of 150 pages to do this. So one of the things we recommend is having a running page numbering system that goes across all of the 3 attachment files. So project narrative attachment file would start at, it'd start at page 1, and then where the project narrative attachment file ends off on the page numbering, the budget narrative attachment file would resume from that point. And then where the budget narrative attachment file ends, the other attachments file would start, and that last page number at the end of the other attachments file should be 150 or lower. And there are other past webinars that I'll be referring you guys to in a second, where they'll elaborate on this a little more. So when you're ready to submit the application, like I said, you're going to click that button that says check package for errors. If your application has everything filled out, and you don't have any more of those yellow mandatory fields, then it will say yes. Every item will check out. And if everything checks out, then that save and submit button that I showed you earlier will go from gray to black, meaning that you can now click it. So before you click it, you're going to want to make sure that, just look through your application again, just make sure everything is included, and then save that to your computer, and then make sure that you have a good solid internet connection. So you don't want to be clicking save and submit if you're, for example, sitting in a Starbucks and using their free Wi-Fi, right? You should be trying to use something that is going to be solid and something where you're not going to have the connection cutting out intermittently every few minutes, because that might interrupt your upload. And if you feel that you don't have access to an internet connection that you can rely on, then you may want to apply for a waiver to be exempt from the electronic submission mandate. Okay, so after you click on that Save and Submit button, you'll see a pop-up window that's going to prompt you to log in using the AOR user credentials for your Grants.gov account. And this is why it's important for you to register on SAM, the Systems for Awards Management, and Grants.gov long before you are ready to submit your application. Because if you're going to do it for the first time on this day, you might not be able to have your account approved in time to submit before the 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time deadline. And remember that this has to be your AOR's login. Then after you log in and follow the instructions, you're going to wait for the submission to go through, and keep in mind that this may take some time. So you might click that button and think that nothing's happening, but really something is happening underneath, in the program. And you'll be able to, eventually you should see like a little progress bar that pops up on the bottom of your screen. And it could take as long as 30 or 40 minutes to upload, depending on your internet connection speed. But for most people it'll take about 5 to 10 minutes. And so there are a few issues that we found people experienced during the last application cycle. So one of them is, if you're using Adobe Reader or Adobe Acrobat Pro, when you click upload, the program might ask you, do you trust this site? That this is a new website. Adobe Reader is attempting to make a connection between your computer and Grants.gov. And so if it asks you that, just say yes, always trust this site. But make sure that you go back and restart the submission, because that message is going to have interrupted your upload, which means that you'll need to reinitiate the upload. So you'll just need to start over and go through these steps again. Another potential problem has to do with your computer's antivirus software. So if you have antivirus software designed to prevent your computer from making connections with outside websites, then it may also prevent Adobe Reader from connecting with Grants.gov. In this case, you might need to temporarily disable your computer's antivirus software, and then after you successfully upload your application, then you can re-enable it if you want. And this issue might also apply to other types of security settings. Say, for example, if you operate on like a local office network or something like that. After you submit your application successfully, you'll see a pop-up message. The pop-up message is going to include a tracking number, and you're going to want to keep that for your records. You're going to look also for 3 confirmation emails that are going to go to your AOR's inbox. The first is going to be a receipt email. This is basically just saying that Grants.gov has received your application, which means the file upload was successful. But this doesn't necessarily mean that it was successfully validated. To know that, you'll need to wait for the submission validation email. That's going to say that, you know, everything in your application checks out. If you know, you might not get that email. You might instead get an email that would be a rejection with errors. If this happens, you'll need to respond as soon as possible, right? You'll need to open your application, find the problem, change the problem, fix it, and then re-upload it. And this will need to be done before the deadline. So if you wait till the 11:58 p.m. Eastern and you submit it, and then you get the rejection email, it may be too late for you. This is why you don't want to wait until the last minute to upload your application. The final and third email you'll receive is the agency retrieval email. This just means that your application has moved from Grants.gov to ANA, the agency, and is now awaiting review. So just to recap on what we covered today, we talked a little bit about how to apply for an NLCC grant on Grants.gov. We looked through the funding opportunity announcement and the evaluation criteria, and we learned a little bit about how to format, package, structure, and submit an NLCC application for ANA funding consideration. So just as a reminder, this applications are going to be due on June 1st, 2016 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, please take note that that is in Eastern Standard Time, and you're going to want to think about what that's going to be at your local time. And like I said, don't wait until the 11th hour to submit your application. So if you are interested in applying for this grant, there's some other resources you might want to check out. The program areas page of the ANA website lists some, an overview of the program and also a listing of all of ANA's other initiatives. You can find that at their website, www.acf.hhs.gov/program/ANA/programs. The funding opportunities page is where you can get the FOA. That's going to be, under the grants section in the funding opportunities page. And, this, like I said, is a condensed version of what we usually offer as a 2-day training in pre-application trainings. You can find the in-depth concepts from pre-application trainings in the pre-application manual, which is available in the resource library on the ANA website. That resource library also includes a bunch of other very useful resources, including recorded webinars that we've held in the past. So listed on screen are some relevant past webinars you might want to check out. We did a 3-part application development series a couple years ago that you might want to check out to really flesh out your pre-app concepts, especially those of you who have not applied for a grant or attended a training in the past. We had one on preparing and submitting the application, which goes into detail with filling out the SF424 and paginating those 3 attachment files I talked about. Our asset mapping webinar would be useful for, taking inventory of that current status of language, what assets and resources are available to you, which is going to be a part of your outcomes and approach sections in particular. Then we had 2 niche webinars related to native language education that might be useful as well. One on language evaluation, and then one on creating culturally appropriate language assessments and proficiency tools. And all of those and more recorded archived webinars can be found on the ANA resource library by searching by name. And for those who registered, I'll also be sending out these resources with direct links to the video recordings in a follow-up email to everyone who registered using the email addresses you registered with. And so here we are in our Q&A portion. We're going to open this up for about 15 to 20 minutes. We do have Commissioner Lillian Sparks Robinson on the line with us. We also have Mia Strickland, who is the Director of the Division of Program Operations. And like I said, she's one of the official contacts in the FOA. So I'll be reading your questions, and either of our guest presenters can respond. So the first I see is from Wayne. Wayne asks, is a project for developing a language nest for ages 3 to 5 acceptable for an NLCC program? And I guess either of you could take a crack at that.
So thank you, Wayne. This is Lillian. And the creation of a language nest is certainly an allowable activity, but it can't be the only activity, because really the point of this grant is to make the connections between all of the partners that are required, and that includes the early childhood component, your K through 12 educational system, and your higher ed educational system. So if you have your K through 12 in place and the higher ed in place, and what you're missing is the language nest, and that's how you want to focus, then certainly I think you would just need to demonstrate that how it would feed into the rest of the system, and that you have all of the partners that are required to be eligible to apply for and receive funding under this program.
I would also add to that, this is Mia Strickland, by the way, that we also have the Esther Martinez Immersion FOA, which or actually the preservation and maintenance, if you want to develop the capacity to establish a language nest. So you might want to look at those other funding opportunities. They have closed for this year, but we do anticipate offering them in the next fiscal year.
All right, thank you very much for those responses. The next question comes from Kahi. And Kahi says, aloha kako, do you need to have a partnership or be a university or college to satisfy the post-secondary partner requirement, as opposed to like a community-based adult ed type organization?
Yes. So yes, you do need to be a community college or a private college or institution of higher learning to fulfill that requirement.
All right, thank you, Lillian. And I think, yeah, Kahi is coming from Hawaii. So let's see, at that university level, could that be like a university in Hawaii? Would
Yes,
they qualify for that?
yes. So it could be the University of Hawaii or University of Hilo or any of the many community colleges or satellite campuses of any of those. So let me just clarify. It doesn't have to be a tribal college and university. It just has to be an institution of higher education or higher learning that is a partner with the entity that's applying.
And I would just add to that they could be a partner, but the applicant organization still needs to meet the eligibility criteria that's set forth in the FOA.
All right, thank you for those clarifications. Next question comes from Aaron Reynolds. Could the development of a language board to oversee the tribe's language programs and ensure they have aligned curriculum be a feasible project? So a language board.
So we don't determine how it's governed or structured. What we do determine or have to make sure is adhered to is that whoever's applying is an eligible entity. So we still have to have a tribe or a nonprofit organization whose board of directors for the entity that's applying is made up of a majority of those who are Native American or have a cultural relationship to the community. So, for example, a non-Native nonprofit couldn't come in and apply and say that, but our board that's actually overseeing and advising us is made up of all Native language practitioners. That would not work. It would have to be a Native entity that came in, and they could either use their current board of directors, that would be all Native or majority Native, as well as, and say that we're also using this additional board of language experts to assist with this.
All right, thank you for that clarification, Commissioner. And just to add on to that, when you're creating your project design, just make sure that your solutions are really tailored to your community's needs using a community-based project development process, like we outlined earlier. So, even though it had that list of types of projects, activities to consider, you're certainly open to tailoring solutions that are more appropriate for your community, and you're highly encouraged to develop and design those strategies alongside your community and with your community. Okay, so Betty is asking, can we attach our OWPs as a PDF document? The process online is cumbersome and time-consuming. For the benefit of those who did not attend this webinar, please move the OWP from the optional section on the application. I could adjust that a little bit first, and then maybe one of you could elaborate on that. So the OWP is listed as optional because the grant application package is built to be standard for the whole federal government, whereas the OWP is something that that is unique to ANA and maybe a few other places. So it's listed as optional, though it is required, and I guess you guys can elaborate on the other parts of that.
Thank you, Matt. I'd like to elaborate. This is Mia Strickland again. The OWP has to show up as optional in the Grants.gov system, as Matt mentioned, because it's not used across the federal government. So the way it shows up on Grants.gov is it's optional, but it is a required element in your application. As you can see, there are point values assigned to it, so it would behoove you to attach it. We do ask, we encourage you to use the online version that's built in the Grants.gov system for the OWP. We know in past years that applicants have had challenges with the OWP. We worked with the Grants.gov team over the past year to improve the functionality of the form. You can now add lines in between the activities so that if you forgot to add a row, you can go back in and add it now. So if you still have comments about the functionality of the OWP, feel free to email me after you use it this year and let us know what your challenges are so that we can go back to the Grants.gov team and continue to refine and improve it. But the online version is the preferred version versus the Word document that you'd have to find elsewhere.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Strickland. Okay, so the next question is coming from Angel, and Angel says, could this be used for language teacher professional development of the teachers at early childhood the public schools and curriculum at those places?
So yes, as long as the public schools is the LEA is one of the partners. So we anticipate that the funds will be used for professional development, for curriculum development, for various trainings. So the activities are still allowable as they are under other language programs.
All right, thank you. And I see there's a second part to that question. So the second part was, also we have areas on our reservation that are underserved with no classes in their schools and need for additional staff. Could this be acceptable?
So you would have to demonstrate how this is adding to the continuum of native language education. And certainly we understand there's a teacher shortage, not just for native languages, but for a lot of schools located in reservation or tribal or native communities. And so I have to be careful because I can't say to be competitive. What I have to do is stick with the FEWA and say that, certainly we do provide for teacher training and allow for the funding of teachers. But I think you will really want to think about how does that tie into the overall purpose of the goal of this particular program.
All right, thank you for that clarification. And in addition to those, to that, you also want to consider, in your SMART objective criteria, the achievable and time-bound aspects might also define, what you'd be able to accomplish in that period. And so this is, closing the gaps of the continuum, but just think about what's realistic for you to be able to do during that time period with a coordinated team as well. Okay, so we have another similar question from Carla. In filling in gaps of the continuum, such as at the middle school level, would it be acceptable to aim activities at a tribe's after-school program rather than a public school's middle school? Extracurricular type of partners.
So you would still need to be able to demonstrate that one of your partners is a K-12 system. And certainly, the dollars can be used to create or supplement any after-school programs or Title VII or I guess they're Title VI programs now that are after school that the tribe might operate, but it wouldn't be able to substitute for whatever missing grades there are.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. All right, we have one more question from Marcella. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It was mentioned earlier in the webinar that NLCC can overlap if you currently have a PNM Preservation and Maintenance grant. Our current PNM grant ends 2017. So yeah, Marcella, you can have an NLCC grant at the same time as PNM because they are on two different CFDA numbers. And so that restriction only applies if they have the same CFDA number. Yes, so they can be, you can have them at the same time, but it should be different projects. And this NLCC project should be very much focused on this closing the continuum, the gaps in the continuum. And it's possible that your PNM project could be a part of that continuum. And either of you could add to that.
I just typed the response. I would add to it that you can have more than one award. You can have a PNM project and an NLCC because they are, as Matt said, different CFDA numbers. However, I'd also caution you that ANA has another policy that we don't fund or we will not fund previously funded activities and objectives. So if your NLCC project repeats an activity or objective that was already funded through the P&M award, that activity would be, we wouldn't have funded again for a second time. So be sure it's not duplicative of your existing award.
All right, very important point there. Okay, so maybe we'll take a second. If any of you have any more questions, you can type them in now. We'll just wait another minute or so to see if there are any more questions. All right, so we have a question from Alicia. And this will be our last question. So do all gaps in age range need to be completely filled with total immersion language instruction upon the 5-year period? Pre-K, K-5, 7 to 8, 9 to 12, college. So do they need to be completely filled by the end of that 5 years?
I'll take this one on. This is Mia, Alicia. We understand over the 5 years that some of the gaps may need to be filled, and we also never refer to the word immersion in our FOA. So you need to demonstrate that over the course that you have partners in place to work towards developing that continuum. And yes, all those age groups are specified in the FOA. So you definitely want to address how you can reach all those age groups with language instruction. The type of language instruction is up to you based on the resources available in your community and what you're requesting. But the most important part of that is that, yes, all areas or levels of instruction are ultimately what we're looking for in this FOA.
And this is Lillian. I just want to add, but we recognize that 5 years may not be enough to fill in all of the gaps. And so we're not requiring that by the end of the 5-year demonstration that everything will wrap up nicely in a bow. We recognize that there might be challenges along the way, but we hope to be able to learn enough so that at least there's a plan in place by the end of the 5 years to be able to fill those gaps.
All right, thank you very much for those answers. And I guess, okay, one last question before we end from Lorene. She's curious about how many letters of intent were received. I guess before you answer that question, if you'd like, I should just point out that the letters of intent, please still continue to send them, and yeah, they'll be taking those letters, even though that the deadline in the FOA has passed. They will continue to accept them. So, would either of you like to respond to that?
I don't know if I'm at liberty to disclose that information at this time, since the competition is still open, and we can't give an unfair advantage to anyone. And so we have received letters of intent. We are still accepting the letters of intent. They do not have to be descriptive of anything that you're doing in the project. We just need to know who you are as an applicant organization, and that you are interested in applying. And you can send that email to me. I think it's definitely in the FOA, and but I don't think I can disclose how many LOIs we've received at this point.
All right, thank you for that. Okay, so that's all the time we have for our Q&A session. Just to remind you all, if you have a project idea, or if you are working with young people ages 14 through 24, and and have a project for developing leadership and resiliency in Native youth, then you may be interested in applying for the new iLead initiative, the Native Youth Initiative for Leadership, Empowerment, and Development. Grant applications will be due on June 13th, a couple weeks after NLCC is due. The ANA Western region will be presenting a pre-op webinar similar to the one that you just heard for NLCC. They'll be doing that for iLead on May 12th. And so you can find out more and register once the form is made available on their website, anawestern.org. In addition to the resources I pointed out, your regional TTA centers are definitely here to help you complete your application. So if your project description and application is 75% complete, then you can request a read-through from your regional TTA center by sending a request on your letterhead with your AOR signature. And your local TTA centers will look through your application, send you some feedback that you can use to improve your application and tighten up the format before submitting it. So listed on screen are all of the websites for your regional TTA centers. The Eastern region, anaeastern.org, the Western region, anawestern.org, the Alaska region, anaalaska.org, and then the Pacific region, which includes Guam, CNMI, American Samoa, and the Hawaiian Islands, anapacificbasin.org. The date, the latest you can submit it is going to be dependent on your TTA center. Basically, the sooner you start, the more TA you'll get. So the best thing would be to contact your local TTA center as soon as possible and get that relationship started with them so that they can give you the best technical assistance that they can. So a reminder, once again, it's going to be due on June 1st, 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. Send your letter of intent, like Ms. Strickland said, as soon as you can. You'll find instructions for that on page 22 of the NLCC FOA. And, like I said, the deadline has passed, but you should still submit it. Just submit it on your organization's letterhead. Just simply saying, your organization intends to apply. Don't need any details or anything. And email that to Ms. Strickland or mail it to ANA using the submission instructions in the FOA. So with that, we're going to end today's session. Just want to thank everyone for joining us today. We're really encouraged by the excitement that has popped up around this topic, and we are very honored to have been able to feature Commissioner Sparks Robinson and DPO Director Strickland on today's session. So thank you everyone for joining. My name is Matthew Ng. I'm the Outreach and Technology Specialist here at the Pacific Region. My contact info is there on screen. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions that you have. Listed on screen is also the phone number for the ANA OATS Department, Office Administration and Technical Services Department, formerly known as the Help Desk. The artist formerly known as the Help Desk there, 1-877-922-9262. This has been a presentation of the Administration for Native Americans, session presented by the Pacific Region TTA Center. My name is Matthew Ng, and thank you for joining us. Aloha.